President Biden made a public appearance this afternoon with a speech intended to highlight his efforts creating infrastructure jobs. But one word was notably absent from his speech, and that word was diesel. Even as the president tries to tout his economic record, the energy crisis he caused has cratered our diesel supply to a dangerous level, while its price has surged by nearly 40%. Now, here's the question. Would an electoral defeat next week drive home to the president and to his party that voters are dissatisfied with the policies that they have put forth? Joining me now to discuss this and more, Senator Kevin Cramer. He serves on 5 Senate committees, including the Senate Banking Committee. He represents the state of North Dakota. Senator Cramer, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Great to join you. Thank you, Tony.
Let me get your reaction to the president's remarks as the midterm elections are almost here. He spoke today as well as last night in Florida. Is the president boxed in because of his own administration's energy policies that have caused so much pain to the American family?
Well, Tony, there's no question about that. In fact, I thought his speech a couple of nights ago, where he announced that it's the evil oil companies that are to blame for the high cost, and that in fact they need to be punished with a windfall tax because they're holding on to their profits, was perhaps the best example of basic economics that is missed by this administration. And by the way, standing right next to him was his Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, who clearly knows better, and his Energy Secretary, who I'm not sure knows better. But when you think about it, he has helped drive up the price of energy, including diesel, including gasoline, especially probably diesel and gasoline, by his policies, because his policies have driven down the opportunity to produce more of that product. And when you drive down the opportunity to produce more, that means you can't invest your profits. And that, again, drives up the price. And then he complains that they are making too much money and should be punished for it, which adds to the price of the product that they're producing. It's total absurdity. And I can't imagine there's an economics teacher in all of America that doesn't know better than that.
But if you come at it from a socialist or Marxist framework, it makes perfect sense.
Well, kind of, except that this Marxist has to be elected. And there's an election in 5 days where people are largely going to vote on pocketbook issues and inflation. You talk about the diesel issue, and when you think about energy and how it's part of the value chain of everything we produce, everything we manufacture, everything we grow, everything we import and export, whether it's the product, the feedstock for the product that you're making, which is a lot of products, or whether it's just the transportation of goods and services, particularly crops and food, to a hungry world, all of this is enhanced by the price of energy. So I don't know how you win an election when you're almost solely responsible.
Well, unless you've been repeating this stuff so often that you actually believe what you're saying. But the diesel crisis in particular is not something that the industry has not been warning about. I mean, you go back to early summer, actually, last spring. The industry was warning the Department of Transportation that there was a crisis looming on diesel, but there appears to have been no action taken.
No, and this is a tough one, Tony, because diesel is something that obviously it's a product that's made by oil. It's refined like gasoline is refined, but it's very specifically used in some very important industries, especially the transportation sector, transporting things by truck and rail. Diesel also requires another byproduct, if you will, or another product, and that's DEF, diesel exhaust fluid, which is required in any engine that's been built since 2010, I guess. And urea is the feedstock for DEF, and Russia and China are two of the largest countries that produce urea, Russia number 1. So obviously, you can see this coming for a long time. We have a lot of urea that can be mined here on the North American continent, lots of it in Canada, as a matter of fact. And instead of opening up more mining, and by the way, more refining of oil products, he goes the exact opposite direction, tries to shut down mining, shut down refining, shut down production of the commodities that create these products. And somehow it's somebody else's fault. It's really tragic, and I think it's quite transparent.
Senator, as you pointed out, this is a very important sector when you talk about transportation, diesel-driven trucks, trains. That's what delivers a lot of America's food supply. A lot of things come on truck and rail. In fact, almost everything. So could we be seeing a crisis of even food shortage as a result of these failed policies on energy?
Well, there's no question. And Tony, we haven't even talked about the workforce challenge, which is an additional problem when it comes to truck drivers, especially. And then on top of that, we have this constant threat of a possible rail strike. So you've got a labor strike looming, at least being threatened. You've got a shortage of drivers, a shortage of diesel, super high costs, and then a global economy that to boot. So yeah, all of this could speak to a looming crisis. This is why I think, and I noticed you reported, of course, like everyone is today, that the Federal Reserve announced another 75 basis points increase in the Fed interest rate. And I expect there'll be more of that. I'm not really sure what the right policy is or what the right timing is, but we've got a crisis that's not just inflationary. And I know we had a fairly productive last quarter by comparison to recent quarters, but there's still real serious problems on the horizon, and I do worry that inflation is becoming entrenched. Not just, well, certainly not transitory. It was that
right,
ship sailed
as we were told.
Ago.
Right. Very quickly, I want to switch topics. There has been a major story this week that the Department of Homeland Security regularly works with big tech platforms, as well as I understand Chase Bank has been in these meetings, all about suppressing or censoring, I should say, the speech of some Americans. Your thoughts on this?
Well, this is one of the most frightening things that's happened under this administration. It's been happening for some time, the collusion between big tech and liberals in general. But when you get an administration who says, by the way, that they're not doing this, and then they're caught doing exactly that, it has so many constitutional ramifications, just common decency ramifications. If you start squelching, censoring First Amendment rights, wow, we are in a lot of trouble as a self-governed people, because the self-governed can only be successful if the governed are well-informed. The greatest backstop to corruption, I've always believed, is complete transparency. You don't have to like what everybody's saying, but you have to let them say it within some bounds, of course. But this is way too far. And I think if Republicans take majority in both chambers, which I believe, Tony, they're going to do, I think we're going to do it big, both in the House and the Senate. These people have to be brought before these committees and held to some account, and there has to be rigorous oversight and maybe even some enforcement action with a couple of these cabinet secretaries.
Senator, I agree 100% with you. I think whether you agree with someone or not, they should have the right to speak, obviously within the bounds of not inciting certain things. But the reality is our system of government only works if people have a voice in the process. Right. And by silencing those voices, I think it leads to what we've been seeing, violent activity, which is absolutely wrong. We cannot sustain a republic on that. Senator, we're out of time. Always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for taking time to join us today. Look forward to seeing you real soon.
As do I. Thank you, Tony.